Hi there, my name is Arron Gill and welcome to 100 Stories Deep. Today I'm reading Amir Aziz by Bobby Nayyar, which is a story from the book of Birmingham, a city in short fiction. I like this story because although it will seem that not much is happening, it really shows how complicated friendships and relationships can be, especially when they're shaped by the residues of colonialism. But let's see what you make of it. Amir Aziz by Bobby Nayyar. Late in August 1974, Amir Aziz broke both his ankles. The doctor said that it was a 1,000,000 to 1 accident. He replied that to suffer at such long odds was actually a blessing. He had been carrying some boxes down a metal stairwell, tripped and then trapped both of his feet as he fell forward. I was there when it happened, his screams reaching out to the shop floor, to the offices. The doctors had to operate. They placed metal pins in his bones. They said that it would take between 4 to 6 months for him to recover. Amir shrugged it off and tried to smile, a thin line of tears on his face. I was the only one from the factory to visit him. The others had been told to stay away while the bosses decided what to do. Amir's wife, Farah, found it difficult to see him on a daily basis. In May of that year, she had given birth to their second daughter, and she was overwhelmed. She brought the two girls, Aisha and Dima, to the hospital ward, sat down, and broke in tears. She didn't know how to manage the house by herself. Amir tried to make her laugh, and when the tears subsided, she rapped on his chest and shrieked, "Why can't you break your legs when you're an old man?" You see, Amir was 24. He reached out and Farah placed Dima in his arms. He wiped a tear from his cheek and whispered a promise into the sleeping baby's ear. 2 weeks later, he was discharged from the hospital. I drove him back to his house on Crockett's Road. Both of his feet were in plaster, and when he walked with crutches, they looked like they were made of concrete. Aisha was a little scared of him and hid behind her mother. He tried to laugh it off. Amir was happy to be home. His hospital stay had given him some time to think about his options, and they weren't that good. He had a minimal education, few friends, and 3 mouths to feed. Manual work was his lot. He knew that he would have to switch to another tack. He decided that he would become a taxi driver. Farah laughed at him at first, when he told her, and then saw the steel in his eyes. She looked up at his feet and Amir nodded his head. He would have to wait. The upshot of his fall was a cheque delivered by one of his bosses. The sum of money was considerable, more than enough to buy a car. Amir accepted the amount, signed some papers and waved the man goodbye, sure that he would never see him again. He tried to spend as much time as he could on his stumps, that's what he called them, and was soon able to do a few tasks around the house. The money had given them some breathing space, and a few of his friends returned to offer a hand. When the day finally came for the cast to be removed, Amir went to the hospital alone. He caught a taxi. It was his idea of networking. He came back with a walking stick and a job. Farah, clinging to him and laughing, said, "You don't even know how to drive." Amir nodded and smiled. See, he was working a month later. He had bought a green Vauxhall Viva estate and was taxiing around Handsworth and Great Bar. He worked longer hours than he had ever done at the factory. It was like the months of inactivity had given him an intense amount of energy. On a cold Saturday, on the cusp of spring, he came to me with 2 pieces of news. "I bought a house," he said, followed by, "Farah is pregnant." I congratulated him, not sure which mattered to him more. Amir was ecstatic. He couldn't keep still. We walked over to Peyton Road, not far from his house, to take a look at his investment. House was a strong word. The place was a brick shell, gutted from the inside out, the windows missing. You could see straight into the main room and the kitchen. It was all a black, charred mess. "Are you sure about this?" I asked as he unlocked the front door. He nodded his head and gave me the grand tour. It was old and forgotten inside. 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen and a bathroom, a coal cellar and an outhouse. I tried not to look worried, hoping that he planned to tear the place down and start anew. Amir spent a few hours in the house each day, cleaning and deciding how to renovate it and modernise it. Through workers at the factory, he became friendly with some contractors. They did most of the building work. For a time, that shell of a house and the men who came intermittently to work on it became a second family to Amir. I would go to his home on Crockett's Road to see him, only to greet a disappointed Farah. There were no words to be said. The look on her face was enough. She wanted my help. I made the mistake of asking my wife what I should do. Her face darkened at the thought that I was between Farah and Amir. "You have your own family to worry about," she answered. And I didn't talk back. In May 1975, Farah miscarried. News spread quickly among friends and relatives, who came to the hospital to comfort her. Amir was there at first, crestfallen and silent, sat near the foot of her bed. As the numbers of visitors grew, he became more and more withdrawn, leaving without saying a word to his wife. Distraught that he could be so cruel, I left the hospital to look for him. I drove to the house on Peyton Road. My anger subsided as soon as I found him slumped on the floor. He told me that he had lost his son. Amir loved his daughters, but never hid his desire to have a boy. In confidence, he told me that it was the measure of a man to how he would raise his son. I found it hard to be sympathetic. My firstborn was a boy. We sat in silence for what felt like an hour. Then Amir got up and said that he was going back to the hospital. Farah had noticed her husband's absence. She returned from the hospital, faded, resentful that her husband did not respond in the way that she expected. She encouraged him to continue working on the house. He accepted the encouragement on the face value, feeling that if the house was a success, then all was not lost. I saw him less in the months that followed. On my wife's instance, I stopped going to the house on Crockett's Road. Towards the end of summer, Amir called me to say that the house on Peyton Road was ready. Amir used all of his contacts to fill the house on Peyton Road with Pakistani migrants, young men who weren't ready to get married, most of them recently arrived and working in warehouses and factories. He kept the rent low and fostered a good relationship with each one of them, not minding when they earned enough money and moved to better accommodation. When one left, there was usually another to take his place. A year later, he had his eye on another property on Woodland Road. It was Dima's second birthday, and Amir invited a few families over for tea and cake. I took my wife, kids, and a fluffy toy to their tiny house on Crockett's Road. Amir sat with me in their concrete garden and ate oranges and dates. He had never fully recovered from his accident and walked with a slight limp. His relationship with Farah had also failed to mend. They were cordial to guests but not to each other. Amir confessed that they slept in different rooms. His sad eyes betrayed the smile on his face. I placed a hand on his shoulder and looked at the low brick wall and the clothesline and our children playing unhindered around us. Amir brightened up when we talked about the house on Woodland Road, who bought it cheaply and was doing most of the renovation work by himself. He decided that he would rent the house out to a small family. I was happy for him, glad that even though he couldn't fix his own problems, that he was thinking about the problems of others. A few days after a family moved into the house on Woodland Road, Amir told me that he'd bought another house which he was planning to convert into flats. I didn't understand how he was able to keep buying properties. It was like he had secretly won the pools. His former colleagues at work were less kind. They said he'd gone into business with some moneylenders who would have no qualms about breaking his ankles again. At first I defended Amir, then I just kept silent. My wife and I were keeping a stable home at Station Road, but we weren't moving anywhere. In this country where we came to live, work and die, success is a dirty word. Amir was a success, and the stench of his achievements followed around him throughout Birmingham. Some of his friends came to resent him when he moved from Crockett's Road to a bigger house in Handsworth Wood. And I admit that I found it hard to stay away from those feelings. I was the same age as him and stuck in the same job in the same factory where Amir broke his ankles. I saw him less frequently, sometimes by chance on Soho Road. Other times when either of us felt that our relationship had drifted too far down the road. He called me or I called him. And at some point that stopped too. By 1985, Amir owned many properties around Handsworth, all of them carefully picked and filled with warm people who worked hard for little reward. He switched his attention to the Pakistani parts of Birmingham, to Alum Rock, Spark Brook and to Moseley, and continued to buy exhausted, run-down properties. He still worked as a taxicab driver. Sometimes I saw him flash down my road. He had upgraded to a BMW 535. It was battered like his houses, but moved quickly. By that time, I had arthritis in my hands and knees and was working 4 days a week. The news I had heard about Amir came from different people around Handsworth, most of it thinly veiled gossip, implying that there was something untoward about Amir's success. They would ask me why I didn't go to see him anymore. I didn't have an answer. In 1993, I married off my eldest son. I cashed in part of my pension to afford a big wedding with a reception at the Hilton on Broad Street. I sent an invite to Amir and his family. They didn't come. And although the occasion was very happy and successful, it was soured for me because of his absence. He didn't even get in touch to congratulate me. I found out that his first daughter, Aisha, had run away from Birmingham to be with a man. My bitterness turned to guilt, but I didn't try to contact him. In my time of happiness, there was little I could say to help his sadness. A few years later, I heard that Amir was building some canal-side properties in the city centre. It was a big project and sure to make him a lot of money. I stopped asking about him and concentrated on my own family. I was helping my son to look for a house of his own, while my wife was already asking for matches for our second son. We were still on Station Road, but we were happy enough. The last time I saw Amir Aziz was a few years ago. I was walking with my grandson down Grove Lane. We were going to Handsworth Leisure Centre to swim. On the other side of the road, I could see Amir getting out of a silver Mercedes-Benz E-Class, which he had parked by the pharmacy. He was wearing a navy blue suit with a white dress shirt. He had aged, much thinner than I had remembered, like he'd been ill recently. He went into the shop looking hurried. I stopped in my tracks and set my grandson on a low wall near the gates to Handsworth Park. I didn't want to continue walking and bumping into him. I wanted to flee, but my legs wouldn't have carried me far, and I didn't want to look foolish in front of the boy. I waited by the wall and looked away from the car. When Amir drove by, I couldn't resist taking a look. I turned around to see if he would recognise me. He drove so fast, I couldn't be sure if he had seen my face. My grandson pulled up my sleeve. "Who's that man?" he said. Amir Aziz, I replied. He's a friend of mine. So that was Amir Aziz by Bobby Nayyar, which is part of the Book of Birmingham, a city in short fiction. So, just a bit about the story and sort of my reflections on it. Like the story, to me, it really speaks the sort of language of the unspoken, about how for so many immigrants who were ruled under empire, this idea of freedom, and in this case like family freedom and financial freedom, is so caught up in this idea of acquisition and success and land, which itself is a colonial practice. And this character, Amir Aziz, thinks that if he owns enough properties, then maybe he will be free. But of course the opposite happens, and he's forever bound to the prescriptions of his new social life. And he recognises that that's not really who he is. And I thought it was really interesting that the writer decided to leave it there. And I asked myself, and maybe you can ask yourself, why was it left there on that moment, talking to his grandson? Well, yeah, thank you so much for listening. You can watch and listen to more of the 100 Stories Deep series if you subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on our socials. I've been Arron Gill. Thank you very much, and goodbye.